Hello everyone, it's been around a year since I've made my last State of the Game video, so I thought it was about time to repeat this. And as a first part, or for the first part of this presentation, I'm going to do a quick review of what went on in 2025. So if you watched last year's version of this video, you might remember that it was fairly long and it touched on a lot of private and personal matters that had a fairly heavy influence on the project. And just to get this out of the way, as one of the first things I want to say is that all of these personal things have stabilized more or less. And I think I've really found my groove in 2025, which actually shows in sheer numbers. So, for example, we've had 47 development logs in 2025, which is more or less the exact amount of weeks per year. So, accounting for a few weeks of vacation that I afforded myself, we basically had one development log every week, which I think is a pretty clear sign of constant progress. We had 22 versioned releases, which means a release that actually landed in production game worlds, right? So there's releases sometimes several times a day, which you probably don't notice unless you play in our internal test game worlds or our new preview game world Pain. But yeah, 22 releases isn't too bad. It's about a release every 2 weeks. And also, which I guess is the most important metric, because as you might remember from last year, one of my goals, overarching non-technical goals, let's say, is to kind of reinvigorate the AirlineSim community and get more players on board, win new players. And primarily I want to achieve that goal by having a constant stream of updates, kind of showing to everyone that the project is alive and well. And I am very happy that this seems to be working, depending on how you count, how you measure. We saw a roughly 20% increase in weekly active players in 2025. So this makes me very hopeful for the future of the project. Speaking of new developments and features, the main development topics of 2025 were, of course, the aircraft performance system 1.5, which is a somewhat simplified improvement over the quite shoddy performance system that current generation AirlineSim uses. So it's not a great complete overhaul of aircraft performance. It's not realistic per se, but it's a lot closer to real aircraft performance in that it's not linear anymore in terms of fuel consumption, and the takeoff and landing formulas, while still far from realistic, make a lot more sense. Let's put it this way. That's actually a project that started in 2024 already, and it sort of was taken over into 2025. The next big feature, of course, is individual travel requests. That's sort of I would say, most important feature development of the past year. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about each of these features on later slides. And then, of course, we had location-based demand, which is sort of an ad hoc project that I did more or less for fun at the end of the year. And the idea here is to sort of reduce airports to gateways without their own demand, and that demand actually originates from the locations around an airport. So these are our main three features in 2025. I can't talk about those without also mentioning our paying game world, which launched in late summer last year, which is our first sort of public preview game world. So the idea here is that we have a game world that comes with a certain amount of risk in terms of potential bugs or things going wrong, or me even deciding it's time for a reset because it makes testing easier. So it's somewhat cheaper, but it's also open-ended, so it doesn't have a definite end date or whatever. So yeah, check it out if you want to see the latest and greatest in terms of feature development, because all of that stuff is going to go to paying eventually. There have been some other development topics, of course. The first one was a spring cleaning, as I termed it, which was basically a general overhaul of our code structure and a lot of the dependencies of the software that AirlineSim is based on. So that was a long overdue project because we've been using the same set of frameworks for many years. Several of them have been out of maintenance for many years, and it was about time to take care of that. And it took several weeks. I mean, if you're following the development logs on the forums, you'll see that this spring cleaning alone kept me busy for several weeks. Another somewhat smaller development was the so-called aircraft trader companies. If you are a seasoned AirlineSim veteran, you know that there used to be a single aircraft trading company in every AirlineSim game world, which is called the Aircraft Trade and Leasing Organization. And we sort of wanted to try out a few things in terms of aircraft pricing, or in particular the pricing of used aircraft, especially at the beginning of a new game world. And I thought, why not give that whole thing a little bit of flavor and sort of increase the amount of aircraft trader companies that exist, and give each of them a slightly different personality, so to speak, as to how they price their aircraft bits, basically. So that came out last year as well. It's sort of it's an idea that I want to kind of expand on in the future, like have more NPC type entities in the game that do certain things. So for example, I could imagine at some point to have airports as actual active entities in the game world as well that you have to make contracts with, that sort of thing. Like it's just an idea, but something that I would love to expand on. And then of course I got some of the groundwork done for the upcoming UI redesign. I'm going to talk about that in quite some depth later on during the presentation. But in short, from a technical point of view, this sort of introduced the first bits of an API, which is in itself a much requested feature, because the new front end is going to require an API to interact with the game. So I worked on that, got most of that done, introduced a whole new front end framework for all the future developments in that area. It's not visible much to players yet, except for like two places, I think, when like if you open the version info or changelog in the game, or if you open the game world information pop-up, these things are already implemented in that new framework, sort of as a proof of concept. And of course, the whole build and localization pipeline for that new front end is also in place. Which is actually a good point, localization. There have been a lot of volunteer contributions. One, of course, is the aforementioned Performance 1.5 system. Here, a big shout out to Priller in particular, who has been working his way through a whole lot of aircraft plan or airport planning manuals, they're called, of quite varying levels of quality. Not naming any names here, but one European aircraft manufacturer in particular was not making his life easy there. So thanks a lot to Priller for his ongoing work on researching that data. Then, of course, we have airport and geodata. Here, a big thank you to everyone who reported any issues they found or kind of had suggestions for data improvements or helped us out with sources. And of course, also at this point, a huge shout out to Kuhn, who has been doing the majority of the research and maintenance, kind of all the feedback that you delivered to us basically was handed over to Kuhn, and he sort of worked it all into the data files. So yeah, thanks to you for doing that work. And last but not least, what I mentioned earlier, translations and localization. We've always had a team of very, very, very helpful volunteer translators. And in 2025, in particular, thank you to Jins for doing a full Japanese translation. And by full, I mean like everything, more or less. So this is also a supported language on Steam now, which helps us a lot. And just hot off the presses, before I actually recorded this video, I made the necessary adjustments on Steam to make Simplified Chinese an official, or not official, but a community translation supported on Steam as well, which should help gain more players from China, obviously. So thanks a lot to you, GameGerm, and Lunar for helping out with that localization. So we've talked a lot, or I have talked a lot about the things that were developed in 2025. Now I would want to quickly touch on these in a little bit more detail. So if you have not been following the devlogs and or the news last year, that you sort of know what I'm talking about. So the first one is the individual travel requests, and there's always this bulk in parentheses. The reason it's called that is because it's individual travel requests in the sense that there's individual requests, but they are generated in bulk once a day. So again, if you are a seasoned AirlineSim player, you know that every airport has a demand distribution time once every day. And at that time, all the demand for that airport is distributed in one big go, in bulk, if you want. And that still works exactly the same way, except that we're not distributing 3 fixed passenger types plus cargo, but instead we generate these requests from a whole bunch of different customer profiles, so to speak. And they have each individual request with individual budgets, with individual preferences, with individual arrival times that they prefer, all that sort of stuff. And it's the logic for that, and a lot of the code actually is taken from the Technology Demonstrator project, which if you want to learn about that, either go back to the last year or the 2004 version of this video, or just Google for the AirlineSim Technology Demonstrator and you're going to find it. So I'm very happy that a lot of that work is now slowly but surely finding its way into the game. So what's the status here? I call it functionally complete. What that means is that from a technical perspective, the feature works. Like it has been working in pain for quite some time now. There's been, there's 1 or 2 exclusive game worlds that use it. So from a functional perspective, it's working. It also means that the roadmap item DRS ORS hybrid, which I called it, is also technically done, because to get these individual travel requests working, I basically took a lot of the basic structure of what I built for the technology demonstrator and transplanted it into current generation AirlineSim, and I made it work with the ORS. That's the bulk part of the individual travel requests. So it formed a sort of hybrid. Like the biggest difference between the technology demonstrator and current generation AirlineSim is that the technology demonstrator actually generated individual requests continuously. Like it didn't have that compute an airport once a day sort of thing, but it would constantly churn out travel requests all around the world and deal with them individually. We're not quite there yet, and I don't think, or I'm not sure whether AirlineSim is ever going to see that level of the distribution system, but we'll see. There is some remaining work, of course. First of all, or most importantly rather, there's how product ratings are displayed in the game. So let's say cabin configurations and service profiles, they typically have a distance-based rating in the game that often could go into the reds or into the negative. And that's not how the individual travel requests work. Like, one of the fundamental differences between the individual travel requests and how the old system worked is that the individual travel requests, it's a tough word, isn't it? The ITRs, let's call them ITRs, that they actually, an ITR customer looks at the whole market situation and does a relative rating. So if there's only bad seats in the market, then the bad seats are the best seats. So when sort of configuring a seating configuration, that's not a definite rating in and of itself, but it only becomes a rating relative to the other airlines or the other seats in the market, if you want. So that's something I want to adjust. Also, I think I'm going to add a distance-based customer type probability. That's a mouthful, but basically what it means is that true budget passengers, like with a very limited budget, think low-cost carriers, ultra low-cost carrier passengers, they sort of fade out the longer the distance of the travel request. So on long haul, you typically don't have that sort of customer segment, at least not in reality, for all sorts of reasons. But I sort of want to add something to take out the price pressure on those longer connections. And once that's done, there is, of course, a lot more fine-tuning to do, and basically all the other customer attributes that one could think of would be introduced over time as new features get introduced. But we'll touch on that later on a little bit. There are, of course, a few natural follow-up features for this. One of them in particular is fares. Like, I don't know if you checked out our roadmap, but we have fares as one of the core features of the distribution system or the technology demonstrator. And our tests in pain really showed that fares are one of the most needed features in combination with individual travel requests, which is actually quite interesting to see. Like, I always thought, okay, the most important aspect of the distribution system is actually the booking classes, but it turns out the fares are much more important. But I'm also going to touch on that in a little bit. Then there's location-based demand. As I said, it was an ad hoc project. Like, I knew at the end of 2005 I would not make a lot of progress on the next big feature that I'm going to talk about in a second. So a week before the holidays, I just said, you know what, I'm going to treat myself to a fun project. Time boxed. I have to finish it before Christmas and before a new game world is supposed to launch. So it's a bit of a passion project for me and surely rough around the edges, but keep in mind, it was a fun project for myself mostly. That feature is also, I would say, functionally complete, although much more with a caveat here. Because obviously it works, we have it running in a game world, but it needs a lot of optimization, like both in terms of performance and kind of the tuning, how it behaves. There is the matter of opportunity generation. I don't know if you ever noticed it, but if you create an airline in a new game world, you have this little list of recommended starting locations, and that the generation of these locations doesn't work right now because the location-based demand, that's the whole idea of the feature, is not airport-based, and these opportunities that we generate, they are based on the satisfied demand at a given airport. So going to change that to work based on locations. Then, of course, a few performance optimizations, because we're now dealing with a lot more destinations than before. Like previously, we had around 4,000 or 5,000 airports in the game. Now we have anywhere between 10 and 12,000 locations. I need to optimize that a little bit. And then, of course, there are a few rating adjustments that I'm actually not sure about actually touching anymore, because my gut tells me that in the very near future, location-based demand is never going to get rolled out without individual travel requests. So there's probably not too much point in spending too many resources into making the old school flight rating system work with location-based demand. So there's hence the little question mark there. Next step, of course, is tuning in all sorts of ways. Like we just discovered several issues affecting cargo and tourist destinations, because if everything is population based, then of course that doesn't reflect that a certain area might have more traffic because of tourism. And of course, I'm going to continuously work on how these locations are clustered, how the locations are generated, to make it an overall better experience. And the follow-up features here are things like islands and soft borders. So what that means is that the current location system, and actually the ground network system with airport-based demand as well, neither of these have knowledge of islands, for example. So that one island doesn't have another island in its ground network, because it would be too cumbersome to sort of transfer from one island to another. So that's definitely something I want to improve upon in the future. Then this feature as a whole opens the door to all sorts of customizations. That's why one of the reasons why we tested it in Write for the first time, because Write is a historic game world, and having demand based on population figures obviously allows to have a time progression, like have increasing and decreasing passenger numbers in different countries, with a manageable amount of research work that's required to make it work. And so one of the follow-up features that I could envision for the near future is custom trips per capita, as we call it, which basically just means how many passengers in a country take a trip per year or per day, and then sort of come up with our own formulas and our own logic to sort of come up with that value. And then there's a few other things that we need to look into. So let me hide my video real quick. That didn't work, did it? Let me see. No. Anyway, let's you can imagine what's behind my little behind my face down there. So one thing is the reworked route restrictions. So don't want to go into too much detail, but you know that you cannot operate any given type between any given pair of airports, because there are size restrictions, basically to prevent slot blocking. And since these size restrictions have been, or still are, based on demand levels of airports, that feature sort of broke with location-based demand. So it's one of the things that we need to improve in the future. And then, of course, proper historic game worlds are high on the wish list, but also very, very complex. So no promises here when or whether we're going to get around to that. It's not a very high priority, which you'll see in a moment. Then, of course, we have Aircraft Performance 1.5, already mentioned. It's basically a feature taken into 2025 from 2024. It was the last project of 2024. And that as well is functionally complete. Like, it's working in pain. The only thing that's not there yet is data. So the remaining work before I feel comfortable rolling this out to a regular production game world is that we have the 1.5 compatible data for at least all the major aircraft families. By that I mean like all the common types. You have all your Bombardiers, or now Airbuses, Boeings, the common types in a game world that runs in the here and now, obviously. that's not taking into account all the historic types or Eastern types. Those, of course, we want to cover eventually. But the priority right now is to kind of get all the data in place for the types people actually use. And then we'll take it from there. Follow-up features for this one are, of course, an even better performance system, which is sort of low priority and also highly speculative. I termed it Performance 2.0, and basically what this would bring is actual formula-based performance for different flight phases, taking into account different engines, maybe even temperature, altitudes, proper landing and takeoff performance calculations, that sort of stuff. But I think it would be really nice to have that, but at the same time, it's not a major feature. It's like if we can make it work, fine. If not, it's not a disaster. Another thing that would be a nice addition here would be X-factory customization of aircraft, which basically just means that, just like in reality, you can order an aircraft from the manufacturer according to your specifications. So you can say, okay, I want these engines, I want to have winglets or not, that sort of stuff. Or more commonly, different weight variants, like I want the heavy or the light version, that sort of stuff. Right now, this requires a lot of kind of manual versioning. So we have different versions of the same aircraft that you can order. It would be nice to have that as a proper configurator. All right, but that was sort of the feature highlights of what has been added in 2025. Now I want to look ahead into 2026. So Generation 3 UI, or as I call it, the UI refresh, is the main initiative of 2026. And the point here is making AirlineSim more attractive to avoid this hate on first sight problem, as I would call it. So if someone who might be generally interested in a game like AirlineSim, but they see the screenshots, let's say on Steam, they see the screenshots and say, oh God, this looks so ugly, I'm not going to try this. So this is something that obviously doesn't affect players who are already in the game all that much, but it is crucial to win new players. So that's one of the things I want to work on. As said, a lot of the technical groundwork for this feature has already been completed. But 2026 is going to see the actual implementation, like all the design work and kind of converting the existing game to the new front-end design. That also means that pretty much all the work on this is still remaining, like all the actual implementation and design. And the next steps for me in the immediate future is going to be to finalize the UI structure and the design. And then after that, I'm going to do everything else, like settle on how the mobile version is going to work, the colors, light and dark modes, all of these things. So you can see this is a major development project. That's why I'm also saying this is the main initiative of 2026, because to be honest, I'm not sure how many other things I'm going to get done as a single developer on this project. And this is also sort of an explanation for why all the features that we've been discussing so far are very, let's say, non-visual in nature, right? So I basically have been postponing all the features that require extensive UI work to after the UI refresh, because obviously if I do the UI refresh after I've implemented all sorts of front-end projects, then that would require a lot of duplicated work. One concrete example of that is like a DS search interface, DS meaning distribution system. So for the individual travel requests, I would have loved to have a new interface to search for connections that allowed you to add more customizations. And after the UI refresh, I'm actually going to do that, because it just makes sense. Like, it should have been part of the feature originally. I postponed it because of the design requirements. But as soon as the new UI is in, this is probably going to be one of the first things that I'm going to do. Which, given the size of the UI project, I mean, as I said, it's a bit optimistic, sort of assuming that I'm going to get into much more feature development. But let's stay hopeful, and maybe I can get some more stuff in. As I said earlier, one of the key features that we realized would be required after the individual travel requests is fares. And the reason for that is that we can see in extreme price wars in the game world, in the campaign game world, because people are setting ridiculously low prices on direct connections because they need to do that, or in part because they need to do that to make connections work. And this is really where fares come in. And I'm going to give you a very quick example here in a minute. Just so you know, fares as such are, as the name suggests, primarily about prices, but not only. And once we have them in the game, they allow a lot of other customizations that rely on fares, like think baggage rules, for example, right? So you could say, okay, you can take one bag of checked baggage or one piece of checked baggage per passenger, and then depending on your customer types or your individual travel requests, that would determine whether your connection or your fare would be attractive or not to potential passengers. Just to name one example. But here's the quick example of why the fares are important in combination with individual travel requests. For individual travel requests, every passenger has a maximum budget that they are able to spend. And let's just look at our canonical example here for AirlineSim. You have a connection from Frankfurt to Denver to Amarillo in Texas. And the direct price for this connection, if you were to book from Frankfurt to Amarillo, the standard price AirlineSim generates for that is 570 US AirlineSim dollars, roughly. Figures don't matter here. In the old ORS without fares, but for example with individual travel requests, what happens is you have 560 AirlineSim dollars for the segment from Frankfurt to Denver, which is almost already the direct price. And then you have another 110 for the last segment from Denver to Amarillo, which totals 680 AirlineSim dollars, which in the old system isn't an issue per se because there are no maximum budgets. But if you had fares, what you could do is you could set a fare that sets the total price of a flight from Frankfurt to Amarillo to 600 AirlineSim dollars. So it's above the direct price, but it's far below the combined price of the two segments. And this is crucial because now you don't have to cannibalize your revenue on the direct segment to allow a competitive or to enable a competitive price on a connection. And before you get too worried, and it's a frequent concern that comes that the community presents whenever we talk about fares, is these fares do not have to be on airport level. So you don't have to specify fares from each and every airport to every other airport. Instead, you can define regions. So for example, here I could say I have a fare from Frankfurt to all of Texas, for example. I could even define something like routing rules and say, this is a fare that applies from Frankfurt to Texas, but only with transfers in Denver, as an example, right? And of course, as I said earlier, this is just an example about price. Fares can come with all sorts of other rules. I just hinted at routing rules, but there is a whole lot of other ideas and options on the roadmap actually. So that was a lot of stuff, and we're already beyond a half an hour. But so I'm rushing. You might notice. But there are other candidates, of course, for good next project, as I would call them, which we could deal with either instead or in parallel to the stuff that I've mentioned before. One of the most requested features on the roadmap is actually auto ops or aircraft pools, which is basically just you have a pool of aircraft and you have a schedule that you want to have operated, and then AirlineSim sort of connects these two and makes sure that the flights get operated. And that sort of is a groundwork feature for a lot of other things like more elaborate maintenance features and stuff like that. Already talked about custom trips per capita, already talked about the reworked route restrictions. Related to that, though, is the redefinition of airport handling capacities, or actually capacities in general. So this whole subject area of custom demand is something that I think is going to get more important over the coming years with location-based demand. So for us to figure out, okay, we talked about the islands, but what about like areas that are very touristic or have a lot of tourism traffic, but not a very high population, which I guess is probably the case for most touristic areas. So things like that would be very interesting to look into. Dynamic maps, so kind of have a visual representation of the game world. Inductions is something that I call sort of a tutorial or introduction to particular features in the game to make onboarding easier for new players. Or stuff like rework the basic HR features because they're just so old. Like they're super, super old, very, very buggy. They look dated. So that this is a good candidate for something to work on after the UI refresh. And that's sort of the features that I kind of have on the immediate roadmap, and I'm going to add links to the roadmap and all the individual items that I talked about here to the comments below. So if you want to look into details, you can find them there. But let's look at the concrete plans for the coming weeks, month, and the year, and maybe a bit beyond that. So my immediate plans after you've watched that video, I'll probably already be working on that, which is sort of wrap up the remaining technical work on the individual travel requests and the location-based demand. So the things that I mentioned earlier that are still missing, not the tuning and the fine-tuning and the data research and all that. No, I mean the actual technical implementation things that are missing for me to kind of put a check mark next to those features on the roadmap and say, okay, from a technical perspective, they are done. If the data is there, we can release it. That's sort of my criterion for marking it as done. There's going to be another spring cleaning, by far not as big as the one in 2025, but still at least once a year I want to go in and kind of make sure all our dependencies are up to the latest standard. And then after that, I'm going to dive right into the UI refresh. And as I said, if possible, and if I have the time, and if everything works out as I plan, or as I've planned it, then hopefully I'm going to get around to all the other things that I talked about, and in particular the new search interface and or the fares. Like these are my top 2 projects that are definitely coming as soon as possible. That said, plans do change. So there's always a chance that I'm going to put in that I'm going to put something else on the roadmap in between, just because it becomes because it's urgent or would make sense for, let's say, a new game world or something. Yeah, but there is one overarching goal that I have, and that's definitely not going to happen in 2026. But it's my overarching goals. I do not do milestones anymore much. Like if you checked my last video, like the last state of the game video, milestones are not something that I aspire to anymore. So see that as a target definition, right? If a certain criteria are met, then I would call a new version of AirlineSim 7.0 sort of kind of to communicate to the outside that this is sort of the next generation of AirlineSim done. But all of the individual pieces that make it that new shiny version, they are going to become available long before that. So let's not get hung up on this version number too much. But just to give you a rough overview of what I mean by that, there's certain areas that kind of define this new version. So one is look and feel. So I already talked a lot about UI refresh, just make AirlineSim look better. Make it look more modern, make it work better on something like Steam, where people have completely different expectations in terms of what a game looks like. Because, I mean, AirlineSim is a browser-based game, and it looked and still does look like a browser-based game. But if you open the game in something like Steam, you have really, really rough transitions from one part of, say, account management to the game. So I really want to polish that. There needs to be a better onboarding. Like how can we get new players to find their way into the game? This needs a lot of work. And of course, the map tools that I mentioned earlier, they fall into that area as well, because obviously they make the game world more tangible, make it look more interactive. It looks better in screenshots. I mean, it sounds silly, but that's just one of them. That's an important thing you have to consider. Like, what does the game look like to someone who's never seen it before? Then, of course, the next big cluster of things that need to be finished from a technical point of view is everything to do with not everything, but the core features of the distribution system. As I said before, the fares are one of the most important ones here. Booking classes, of course, so you can define your own booking classes. And advanced interlining, which is sort of something that's going to come out of the other ones sort of automatically, because if you have booking classes, if you have fares, you need to have more control over interlining, sort of to make this whole thing work. And last but not least, there's a general modernization. So I mentioned earlier the staff features. If you have touched them at any point in the past, you know that they are very, very basic. They look incredibly dusty, and they're ridden with bugs. So it's really one of the most embarrassing parts of the game, and I really want to get that modernized. Even if I don't touch, or even if I don't add any new functionality per se, this feature just needs a rework for the rework's sake. Like, it's sad, and I would love to spend my time on other things rather than rewriting an existing feature, but it just needs to be done. Same thing, aircraft orders or the manufacturer's pages in the game, they're also extremely simple. They just stem from another age, and they could use some love, really. Or another example would be instant messaging, right? It's or the in-game messaging. If you send messages to other players, this is incredibly clunky at the moment. So these are all candidates for things that I would love to touch. And only once these really old bits of the game are removed or replaced, that's when I would say, okay, you know what? Now we have an AirlineSim that deserves that version number 7. And from then on, I can add all of these other fancy things that I have on the roadmap. And if you've looked at the roadmap recently, you know it's a long document. There's a lot of stuff on there. There's interesting stuff on there, very, very complex stuff on there. But once these basic things are out of the way, I can finally start looking into these. And while I will not get those things done in 2026, I am somewhat hopeful that the basics will be in place in the foreseeable future, let's put it this way. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, as said, the exact scope is going to be TBD, to be defined. As I said, it's going to change, but that's sort of the flight level 30 sort of vision of things. So, thank you very much for watching. In good YouTuber tradition, please like and subscribe, because while I do not post all that many videos on this channel, I have it as one of my New Year's resolutions to maybe do this a little bit more often. Not for this sort of state of the game, long form, 45-minute style video, but rather for quicker updates on individual features, maybe give you a summary of the development log. If you're not into reading all of these on a weekly basis, you could get summaries with a visual introduction to what's happened. But again, I already said it, this word visual. This is also something that I would love to do once we actually have the visuals taken care of. And I actually work on features that also affect the visuals, and then it makes sense to show you that in a live video format. Well, and yeah, that's me. Thanks for watching again, and see you soon. Bye bye.